Hello and welcome to the Orthodontic Products Podcast. I'm your host, Allison Werner. Today we have back with us Dr. Roger Levin of the practice management consulting firm Levin Group. He's here to help break down the findings of our third annual orthodontic practice survey. Dr. Levin, great to have you back.
Allison, it's wonderful to be back. I love doing the survey with you. I'm glad it's our third year, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Great. Well, as I said, this is now the third year, and the survey asked orthodontists to tell us how their practices fared the previous year. So we're going to be looking at 2023. Before we dive into the details and get into your advice to doctors and staff who are facing some of the challenges reported, what was your overall assessment about how orthodontic practices fared as businesses in 2023?
Yeah, if I had to pick one word, and I like to do that, I would say stability. Okay. Things were fairly stable. We had a pandemic. We had a rapid rise in overhead in 2022, the biggest rise in overhead in any single year in the last 40 years. And in 23, it went up a little bit more, but production in practices in 22 and 23 was fairly stable. We're going to see that it's down a little bit. It's not gloom and doom, but I would say it was a year of stability. That this is the first year since 2020 that we are back to a more normal landscape, normal scenario. We don't have any huge problems. Even the economic problems are limited, although the fact that people are seeing some issues with their everyday goods like eggs and milk and things like that, we're seeing a little bit of a production drop. But I want to be positive. Any practice it looks like right now can use the year 2023 as a launching pad to do really well. So that's great.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so let's start by going through some of the findings, and let's start by talking about production. How did 2023 stack up against 2022?
So I love data and statistics, and you can make them sound like a lot of different things. The fact is that production overall dropped in orthodontics in 2023. Now, as I said, it's not gloom and doom. It dropped by about 4.7%. So nobody has to panic. If I start panicking, so I don't panic, but I would panic when I meet a practice that's down 10% or more. If they're down 10% in a year, any of you listening to this, that's when you really need action and help and turnaround. You don't want that to get worse. I'm not real concerned about the 4.7%, and I'm not concerned because it's a one-year data point. The question, as I wrote in the article that you'll be publishing, is this the beginning of a trend? I've talked a lot about orthodontics getting a little bit more competitive. I mentioned in the article, one of the biggest DSOs in the country now offers orthodontics through its general dentist at $1,999. They have their own branded aligners. So whenever you see competition, you've got to pay attention to see how you're stacking up. The one comment I make always is your goal is to increase production every year. It doesn't have to be by a lot, but if you can do that, if you can increase production every year, you are going to be somewhere between good and great as a practice.
Okay. And you talked a little bit before about how we're kind of stabilizing in terms of, those different, those unique years of 2021, 2022 because of the pandemic and everything. But one of the things that is happening, or kind of looks like it's happening in 2023, is that pent up demand due to the pandemic and all the savings that was built up is kind of disappearing, and we're kind of riding the ship, basically.
Right. If I were an economist looking at orthodontics the last few years, it would be impossible to get a handle on it because the pandemic was so unusual. In 21, the pent-up demand, many of our client orthodontic practices had record years, even though they were shut down from 4 to 6 weeks. And they were exhausted by the end of the year. In 2022, overhead skyrocketed, and there was still huge pent-up demand coming in, people deciding to have ortho. What happened to some degree was that people weren't spending money. So they were sitting at home, saving. They weren't spending it on travel, luxury, entertainment, or restaurants. So there was all this extra money. It wasn't the, $1,200 or $1,400 they got from the government that let them do ortho. It was all the savings. But by 23, we know that savings is disappearing. Now, how do we know that? Because credit card debt now is back to an all-time high. When
Okay.
nobody puts interest on their credit cards if they have discretionary
Mm-hmm.
income to spend. So
Right.
we have definitely bumped up against the excess savings that people could use for ortho, and now we're back to doing orthodontics only for people that really want it, not people who in the past wouldn't have gotten it, but they had extra money, so they decided to get it. So
Mm-hmm.
I
Okay.
think that is a definite contributory factor to the slight drop in production in 2023.
Okay, so keeping that in mind and kind of some of the other economic headwinds, what strategies can practices employ to continue to grow that production?
Well, here's what's interesting. I'm 39 years into this job, so I'm
Hmm.
I'm almost at halfway in my career at this point,
Yeah.
and and I love looking at the numbers over the years because it tells us
Hmm.
so much. The
Hmm.
average practice in 2023 produced $1,535,000 and change.
Okay.
But we know because I've built these models over and over and over, and we've worked with over 4,700 orthodontists since 1985 worldwide,
Hmm.
mainly US, but worldwide. We
Hmm.
know that any solo orthodontist can produce $2 million a year in 4 days a week comfortably. We see a small number, but we see people that do that in 3 days a week. Ortho has what I call the volume factor. Unlike the rest of dentistry, you can put a lot of volume through. And later, probably toward the end, if I'm anticipating your questions, I'm going
Hmm.
to talk about how you might be able to double or triple the orthodontic practice without working one more minute. But for now, the main point is there's a big gap, a $500,000 or 25% between where the average practice is and where it can be. The other way to say it is most orthodontic practices could easily increase production by $500,000 if they had the right strategies and referral marketing in place. And that's an enormous, enormous opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back and talk about practice overhead and what the findings for this survey reported or showed. And I know it said you wrote that overhead was on the rise. So
Yes.
what did practices report for this year?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the good news. The good news is that the overhead rise was pretty small in 2023. It
Okay.
went up about 8 to 9% in 22. It went up
Right.
another 1 to 3% in 23. Not bad. It's slowing down, based on what I know about production, and my career has been dedicated to identifying systems and strategies to grow production. Based on
Mm-hmm.
what I know about that, which is fairly deep, we can make up for a 1 to 3% overhead increase in production in any given year. But
Okay.
59% of the orthodontic practices surveyed did report they had higher overhead, and only a smaller number, 13%, reported that overhead had actually gone down. So it's not a surprise. The
Mm-hmm.
cost of everything is up, and
Yeah.
the increased costs from 22 due to supply chain, due to staffing heavily. I'll get to staffing in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Those costs are not going to come back down. So we must
Right.
increase production to offset them. What I teach, which is very well proven at this point,
Mm-hmm.
is lowering overhead's good, but you can probably only lower it about 3 to 4%, maybe 5
Okay.
or 6 in rare cases. But
Mm-hmm.
if you've got waste, you need to eliminate the waste. The problem is overhead reduction is finite. You can only go so far, and once you've done it, you're
Right.
done. You can only fire an
Yeah.
assistant once. Can't fire her twice or 3 times if you're
Right.
trying to save money. But
Mm-hmm.
production can increase infinitely. It can go up 2%, 5%, 20%. Again, most orthodontists underestimate their real potential, which unfortunately means they're not as protected, that
Mm-hmm.
profit goes down. The problem is if overhead goes up and it's not offset by production, at least equally, profit goes down. So we're seeing a lot of practices that even increase production and profit's still down 3 or 4% a year. So what you want to do is understand that lowering production is a limited gain. Lowering overhead is a limited gain. Raising production is an unlimited gain. If you can grow at 12% in a year, or a lot of our clients grow at 18% the first year and the second year, 18% each, then that's going to offset any 2 or 3% increase in production with a 13 or 14 or 15% increase in profit. So overhead's going up. It's going to stay up. Why? Staffing is a crisis.
Yeah.
It's a different podcast for us to do someday, Allison.
Yes.
I get every dentist I talk to, every new client that comes in is struggling with staffing. And I could list the top 10 negative factors of the staffing situation today. Bottom line, we've got a shortage. It's not going away anytime soon. I think it's with us for at least 10 years, and I can't see beyond that. So we need better systems, smoother running practices, more technology to offset labor. But in the meantime, staffing's up about 10%. And that means production has to go up at least 10% to offset the staffing increase. It's not going to come back down. So if anybody's waiting for it to reverse, it's going to go up more. It's not going to come down.
Yeah.
And we have some real challenges in staffing, which are, number one, there are people who are afraid to work in medical and dental because they're still worried about COVID. I know most people are saying, oh, it's over, but there's still people who are worried. Number two, a lot of people now want to work from home at least 3 days a week. Those people are not taking jobs in orthodontic offices, so they're off the table. And number three, we had about 6 to 7% to 8% of our orthodontic staff retire at all ages. They just decided they're done. And I guess unless they become financially challenged, they're not coming back. So we have a smaller labor pool. We're hiring less experienced people that need training, and the costs are way up for all of that. And if you look at minimum wage, there are articles every day now about minimum wage in California. It'll be the rest of the country, $20 an hour for fast food. That's a 25 to 50% increase in labor. We're only at 10% in orthodontics right now.
Okay. So it's time to start figuring out other strategies too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you want to, we can talk about this later if you want, but you want to keep the staff you have. That's the best way to avoid all the other pain.
Yeah. Well, I think the message here is we're going to do a separate episode on just staffing. So look forward to that. Stay tuned for that.
I'll be happy to. I've been doing a lot of work in that area because we have to. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, let's talk about patient volume and what the survey found, because that does tie into dealing with, countering overhead. You do need to get that production up, so you need that patient volume to be up. So was it up or was it down?
Well,
according to the survey?
72% said it was the same or up, which is interesting because if production's down, a little under 5%, how is volume the same? And the answer is several things. Number one, the volume of referrals does not always reflect the volume of starts. So referrals may have been steady, and we're going to talk about that, I know, but the starts may be down. We have more shopping. We have more options. We can go to a DSO staffed by general dentists. We can go to general dentists who are doing aligners. And that's really interesting when we get to where referrals are coming from. This was a really interesting finding. But it's interesting that 72% said that their volume was about the same. So I found that interesting. But in reality, their volume wasn't rising. And it may be that if you don't have more patients, a higher percentage converting to starts, then you need higher volume to make up that difference. So the fact that we don't have higher volume is the thing to really pay attention to. Don't get comfortable saying, oh, I've got the same number of referrals or consults. And by the way, it's not in this survey. In another look, we found that up to 16% of parents or patients that call an orthodontic office never make an appointment for a consult. Nobody tracks that. So we didn't ask it in the survey because nobody would know, but we did take a hard look at a large number of client offices and new clients so that it was random. And we found that when we start with them, many, as they start tracking, have a number of calls coming in that do not schedule for consults. And they're asking questions like, well, how much is ortho? Or how long will it take? Or do you do this type of procedure? The front desk
Mm.
staffs are not well trained to handle those questions. We need scripting for that. Yeah.
Okay, so the inquiry from the prospective patient or consumer is
Right.
changed.
And the front desk staff, and they're very nice people. I have great respect for
Hmm.
them, but they
Yeah.
are only good right now at the standard basic new patient calling and wanting to make an appointment.
Hmm.
They're not good at building. It's not, they can learn it. They can easily learn it,
Yeah, yeah,
but they're not
yeah.
good at building value in the mind of a patient that has questions. So every practice should at least write scripts for the top 6 or 7 questions that you get from a new patient caller. This is now a good idea. In the future, it's going to
Hmm.
become critical.
Right. It sounds like it, especially as consumers now can, to a certain extent, better comparison shop, even just online to get, look, what are the average prices in my region, or they do have those ads from those DSOs like Aspen
Yeah.
that is freely advertising, very publicly advertising what they charge.
Yeah,
So
we've gone
the
from
patient
years
can just,
ago saying things like, well, we'll tell you that when you come in, and that worked back then,
mm,
to
yeah.
focusing on value building. The new patient call is the first step of what Levin Group calls the new patient experience. And if you don't get that
Mm,
right, you have missed the boat in a big way. And your start rate,
mm,
they may not come in, they may not show up, and they may not accept treatment. All higher if you don't have a great new patient experience value building process in that first phone call. So the front
okay.
desk person has to think of themselves as the first treatment coordinator they meet, and then they come in and they
Mm,
meet the second treatment coordinator. That's how I view it today.
that's a good, yeah, that actually makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. So, okay. Well, so let's break down the sources of new patients. What did
Yeah.
respondents report?
So I want to warn everybody, there's a lot of bias
Uh-huh.
out there about referrals from general dentists. And I want to warn you, this is data. This is not my opinion. But this year, it was a change as the number one source of referrals. The number one source
Hmm.
was from referring doctors. And this is really
Hmm.
interesting because what we show in our surveys is that approximately 3.6 billion with a B,
Hmm.
3.6 billion dollars of revenue is referred each year from general practices to orthodontists. Now, it may have been more
Okay.
5 years ago. We're only in our third year, Allison, of doing this with you, so we don't really know. But the number one
Yeah.
source, 38% of patients were coming from referring doctors. So I
Okay.
I want to be careful because that's the kind of we do. We have a whole program in referral doctor marketing, and I don't want to sound like I'm
Hmm.
leaning towards something because that's what we do. This is complete data,
Right.
completely objective,
Hmm.
but I encourage people build your referral marketing also for referring doctors. Don't say they're doing
Hmm.
all the ortho or they don't refer. We find a lot of new clients who tell us that they're not getting referrals from general dentists because the GPs are doing all the ortho. We find 2 things.
Hmm.
One, they're not getting referrals, but the GPs are not doing all the ortho. They might do some. They're referring it to other orthodontists. And a year later, we're getting lots of referrals from referring doctors. They had just never focused on it. And since it didn't just automatically happen, or it didn't happen after a few strategies, they decided, well, this isn't going to work. And they gave up on it. Well, if you're not doing anything, there's a very good chance you won't get referrals from referring doctors. I'll read you
Hmm.
the list, which I have in front of me. After
Yeah.
after referring doctors, number two was referrals from existing patients. So a lot of dentists
Hmm.
think they're just orthodontists rather think they're just so well known in the community, and they may
Hmm.
be, but it's really referrals from the parents and patients that are a huge segment. So you don't want to just
Hmm.
have little contests for the kids. You want to have 8, 9, 10 different strategies. We have offices right now giving out the new Apple virtual reality
Oh,
glasses.
glasses.
Now they're $3,500.
Yeah.
So you don't buy 10 of them. What you do is you buy one and you make it a 6-month contest where people can enter to win,
Okay.
and then it's thirty-five hundred
Hmm.
dollars over 6 months. So for some practices that's a great idea. Third was
Okay.
referrals from existing adult patients. Now that's going up regularly. In the past,
Okay.
adults were not the big referral sources because we didn't have aligners.
Hmm.
They didn't want to do bracket and wire. And honestly, a lot of
Hmm.
orthodontists don't like treating adults because, they've got an opinion. They are not as easy as the kids. They don't come in
Right.
plugged into their AirPods and never have to talk. You have to talk to
Mm-hmm.
them. So the
Mm-hmm.
adult, I've said for years, the adult market was the greatest unexplored frontier, and I'm predicting that this
Yeah.
adult referrals are going to grow as a percentage of practice referrals every single year from here on for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Third was
Mm-hmm.
social media, uh, but it's not growing. It's interesting. Social media is so hot with orthodontists, and I like it, and you should have it. Don't
Mm-hmm.
misunderstand me. But number one, it's
Yeah.
hit or miss. We get new clients who are doing well with social media, and we get new clients who are not doing well with social media from the same social media companies that they work with. So nobody has, every
Mm-hmm.
social media company I talk to, because we get called a lot, would you recommend us to your clients? And they always kind of come at it from, because we have this secret way of doing things that gets results. Everybody thinks they have the
Mm-hmm.
secret sauce. And the truth is, there's no secret sauce, or we would all know it because everybody would be reading about it or publishing it
Right.
online, or Google would tell us, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But social media is important, but it's not growing as a referral source. It's flat, which is fine.
Okay.
And it's a little bit up from 22. It went from 12% in 21 to 9% in 22, back to 12%. So if you only
Mm-hmm.
look at last year and the 22 and 23, you might say it's up 3%. That's a true statement,
Mm-hmm.
but it's only back to where it was in 21. And again, I
Right.
spend a lot of
Okay.
time looking at this data to try to understand it. And finally, the thing that
Okay.
dropped off, interestingly, was community activity.
Yeah.
Right.
I was
Now,
surprised by
I
that
have
too.
different theories, and I don't know which one's right because I don't have any data yet.
Okay.
Are orthodontists spending less on community activities because of the pandemic, which is over
Mm-hmm.
mostly? Are
Mm-hmm.
orthodontists
Mm-hmm.
spending less because things are more expensive, uh, or or is it just less effective and people are relying on other sources for their referrals going forward? I don't know
Mm-hmm.
yet, but
Okay.
I'm going to be really interested. I made a note next year. The first thing I'm going to look at is referrals from community, because if it's flat or down, then that's a new trend that we're looking at. It could have just been an off year. I don't
Okay.
know.
Yeah. Okay. So, what's your overall takeaway from this information about referral sources?
Well, my takeaway hasn't changed. Just like investing your money,
Okay.
diversify. Don't spend all your
Mm-hmm.
effort. We meet people that only focus on the patients. We meet people that only
Mm-hmm.
focus on social media. And that's great until it runs out. And usually they don't realize it's running out till about 3 years late. Orthodontists have what I call a 3 year mentality. We don't wake up and pop up with a sign that says, "Oh, I have a problem," till about 3 years in.
Mm-hmm.
Then it
Ah,
takes
okay.
longer to reverse. So number
Mm-hmm.
one, I would diversify between referring doctors, patients, and parents, and include a subset of adult patients, the community, and social media. But I would not do it evenly, 25%, 25, 25, 25. Based on this data, I would put more investment into referring doctors. I would put the next most investment into patients, the third investment into social media, and then the fourth investment into community. I would stay with the community, but I
Mm-hmm.
would back that down quite a bit based on what I see here.
Mm.
Now, having said that,
Okay.
you have to monitor your referrals. You've got to understand referral marketing. You need a minimum quantity. The big secret here is not just to have quality. A good social media campaign of
Mm-hmm.
high quality doesn't do it. You've got to have quantity.
Yeah.
How many times do you have to touch referring doctors? How many times do you have to touch parents, patients, and adult patients? How many impressions do you need with social media? Back in the old days when we only had print advertising, you may
Mm-hmm.
remember this. They said it took 17 times seeing
Yeah.
an ad for the ad to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
Well, social media,
Right.
it could be 78 for all we know. We just don't know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, based
Yeah.
on this, I would definitely stay diversified, but I'd reallocate where I'm emphasizing. And if I were a new orthodontist, I
Okay.
would go out of my way to build my general dental referrals. Even if they're doing ortho,
Mm-hmm.
most of them are definitely not doing all the ortho by any means. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay. So now let's switch to the
Okay.
challenges. And we've touched on a few of these already, but we asked orthodontists to identify their top challenges for 2023.
Here you
So,
go. All right.
how
So
did
I'm
it
going to
go?
lead
Yeah.
with this comment first. I am a
Mm-hmm.
huge believer in the economic law of supply and demand. And in almost every
Mm-hmm.
survey I'm ever involved in, and we're involved in others in the rest of dentistry, we do
Mm-hmm.
surveys for William
Yeah.
Blair, the largest Wall Street analysis firm to analyze public
Mm-hmm.
companies. So they want all the data.
Mm-hmm.
They engage us for proprietary surveys. I always start, before I
Mm-hmm.
interpret it, asking, does the law of supply and demand apply here? So,
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
For many years, and back when I was in practice as a general dentist, everybody did well. And we all thought we were
Mm-hmm.
brilliant and good at it and great practice builders. But to a large degree, we were fortunate that the supply of dentists and orthodontists was low relative to the demand for services. So it's not a
Mm-hmm.
matter of being lucky, but the fact is we all look brilliant when the supply is low and the demand is high. Well, that's shifting
Right.
now,
Okay.
and it's past the neutral point. It's starting to shift where, and I've talked about this with you before. 25% of practices are going to have better careers than ever in history. And the next 25 are going to
Mm-hmm.
have good careers. The next 25 are going to have much tougher careers, and the bottom 25 may not even make it. They may end up selling and working for someone else. We're seeing that fragmentation.
Okay.
So we have
Yeah.
challenges today, and the biggest challenge is
Mm-hmm.
not enough patient starts. Well, sure, because if I have enough patient starts, then nothing else matters. I've said forever,
Mm-hmm.
the only two things that really matter in building a world-class ortho practice are the number of referrals and the number of starts. Everything else is just operations.
Yeah.
Every orthodontist can do most of the cases really well. You have to have patience. So, yes, patient starts was ranked. And these are not my rankings. These are ranked. We have 8. I'm going to read all 8. We have 8 challenges that were ranked by the orthodontists in our study, and this is what they reported.
Mm-hmm.
Ch- yeah, so
Yeah.
challenge number 1, not enough patient starts. Well, what that really means is not enough new patients. And it wasn't reflected
Mm-hmm.
heavily in the data, but they may be feeling something. And I've always said when an orthodontist feels something's wrong, they're usually right. People will call me and say, I just feel
Yeah.
like we're slowing down. And their practice is still stable, but when you feel it, you're just
Mm-hmm.
ahead of the curve. In most cases, you're right. So if you're feeling something,
Mm-hmm.
you're probably right. So number 1,
Okay.
not enough new patient
Okay.
starts. That was reported by 71% of the respondents. Number 2, rising overhead. Well, that's a vestige of 2022. If we stay stable from here
Mm-hmm.
on, then in a couple of years, the fact that it's higher than in 2022, everybody will forget that and just say, "Yeah, we're
Yeah. The
fine."
kind of flatline.
Flatline. That's a
Yeah.
great word, and you don't want to do that. Allison, you just summed up the whole thing beautifully. Better than I. Better than I.
There you go.
Number 3, ability to, and it's interesting, ability to retain and hire clinical staff.
Mm.
Now, why is that so interesting?
Okay.
Because in the general practice survey we do separately from this, that's
Mm.
published in a general practice publication, this was
Yeah.
number 1. Staffing was number 1 in 2020,
Um,
number 1 in 2021, number 2 in 2022. Overhead took the number 1 spot, but back in 23, it was
right.
back to
Yeah.
staffing being number 1. So I was kind of surprised to see this as third, but 48%
Mm-hmm.
said staffing's a huge challenge. But we also know that
Yeah.
64% of orthodontic practices are currently looking for 1 or more team members to add
Yeah.
either as replacement or additive. Number 4, competitive
Mm-hmm.
threat for GPs. Um, 38% said that. That is more subjective. My theory, I could be wrong. My theory is they're
Mm-hmm.
more focused on it because they're annoyed about it. They don't like GPs doing ortho. It means they're not referring
Okay.
to the orthodontist. They don't feel the GPs necessarily have the skill set,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of true in that a lot of GPs do
Yeah.
aligners because the AI is in the trays, artificial intelligence, but not because the
Mm-hmm.
GPs like me have any additional ortho training. So I think there's a bias there, but
Okay.
either way, as I've
Mm-hmm.
said to many orthodontists, get over it and deal with it because it isn't going away. Number 6, declining
Okay.
insurance reimbursements, always a challenge. 7, competitive threat from DSOs. That one's going to move up. That one's going to get bigger because
Yeah.
DSOs like ortho and they're just starting to add more and more of it. And some of the big GP
Yeah.
DSOs are starting to add specialists as well. And number eight,
Hmm.
competitive threat from direct to consumer. Well, interesting, that that was number eight, all the way down at a lowly
Hmm.
6%, because it's basically gone.
Yeah.
Will it come back? Who knows, but it's
Yeah.
not here now. I would worry more about AI
Right.
in aligners allowing GPs to be, just distributors for aligners to their patients. That's a reality that I talk about in my
Okay.
lectures.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so maybe that's something we have to
Yeah.
look at in the future surveys is
Yeah.
the
Well, there's a
feelings around
company out
AI.
there, and I know we're going to get to this, so I won't do it now, but they've got like
Yeah.
126
Hmm.
data points now, not for aligners, but 100, but for
Hmm.
monitoring. And I'm studying monitoring really
Yeah.
deeply because it's going to be a huge
Mm.
factor, and a lot of orthodontists are still in the denial stage. And I'm not an orthodontist. I don't
Yeah.
tell people how to practice. I look at market forces, and in my career, I've been
Hmm.
very fortunate in looking at market forces and saying, okay, this is something that's going to explode with growth once it hits the inflection point. But again, my point was not
Yeah.
that. It's AI driven. AI is going to play a bigger and bigger role
Yeah.
in the whole world plus orthodontics.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, one of the things you break out in the article is you do go a little more in depth on dealing with the staffing challenges, which, in this year's survey
Yeah.
came in at number 3. So you identified
Mm-hmm.
sorry, 4 opportunities, or no, actually,
No, I've
sorry,
got
what was
I've
this?
got four for you.
The top answers for,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, okay, go
Okay.
for it.
So here's what's really important. Uh, Staffing
Hmm.
is not a shortage; it is a crisis. And even if your
Yeah.
production is not dropping because of it, which does happen, the rest of your staff is exhausted. So
Hmm.
if we had 6 or 12 hours,
Hmm.
I can talk about staffing from every dimension plus burnout. I've read 4 textbooks now on burnout just to understand the difference between fatigue, frustration, and burnout. And again, that's not for today.
Hmm.
My main message is
Yeah.
you want to focus on staff longevity. You want to measure that every year. And
Hmm.
I could give you many, many, many things to do, but let's go through the four. What 4 things did
Hmm.
orthodontists say? This isn't Today's podcast is not about what Roger
Right.
thinks. Uh, if you think it,
Yeah.
Allison, it's very important. If I think it today, it's not. It's about what did our respondents say, and they came up with
Hmm.
4 key things that they're doing to try to retain their staff. Number one, increasing base compensation. Okay, that's a no-brainer because people aren't going to take
Hmm.
jobs if you don't pay them enough, and everybody knows with full
Right.
transparency what everybody's making. And if any of you have an illusion that your staff is not sharing their compensation every day at lunch,
Hmm.
then you are living in the dark ages. They know exactly what everyone's
Hmm.
making. There are new laws
Yeah.
now in many states where you have to publish the compensation in your ad by law, and it's going to go national. It's going to be everywhere.
Yeah.
Remember, it is a
Right.
labor market. Everything happening is in favor of labor, and I don't take sides. I have to deal with what's happening. A lot is going to be a lot of
Hmm.
regulations going toward labor. Here's an example. We have a
Yeah.
client in California that had to pay a
Hmm.
fortune to a 20-year employee who quit because they never gave her 10-minute breaks on the regulation cycle. And she came
Oh,
back and
yeah.
sued, and
Yeah. I know
a
that's a
lot
big
of
thing.
money. It was not small money. There are
Yeah.
laws on when you get breaks, how
Yeah.
long lunch has to be in different
Hmm.
states. Every state's
Yeah.
different, but pay attention.
Yes.
So number one,
Yeah.
increasing
Yep.
base compensation. Number two, providing more bonuses. And the word bonus, you have to be careful. Has a lot of different
Hmm.
meanings. I've written a book on bonuses, and it's one type of
Okay.
bonus, but there are many. There are bonuses on compensation. There are bonuses on number of conversions. There are bonuses on completing cases on time and overdue debonds. There are bonuses on collections. You tailor the bonus to
Hmm.
what you need to focus on in your practice. Right. Now, if you put a gun to
Okay.
my head and say, well, what is the best bonus? Now that I've said, well, there isn't just one, it would be a production-based
Hmm.
bonus for the team, where everybody shares equally
Okay.
over a certain amount. So a bonus is not a giveaway. And the
Okay.
Christmas bonus is not a bonus.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody cares. Nobody thanks you. It's the 27th paycheck.
Mm.
If you give Christmas bonuses, it's just expected. Um, Number three,
Okay.
adding technology for productivity enhancement. This is going to be big. And technology, it's early. It's
Okay.
very early despite all the workflow technology. I am now studying workflow
Mm-hmm.
technology and how it can increase production and efficiency and even replace certain labor and certain functions. And the reality is that technology is going to be essential. Simplest example, you walk into a McDonald's, there are no cashiers, you order at a kiosk, and then you pick up your order. Why is that happening?
Mm-hmm.
Well, originally it started to save money in the testing phase, but now because they can't get people to work there and higher minimum wage, it's getting very painful. And finally, number four, offering
Mm-hmm.
more and better employee benefits. There are people to healthcare is a fortune. There are people that want healthcare. They want a lot of orthodontics do
Yeah.
not give dental benefits, which is kind of ironic. Yeah,
I've
yeah,
heard that.
kind of
I've heard
ironic.
that. Yeah.
General dentists can give it
Yeah.
because they can do most of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a cavity
Yeah.
or whatever, but a lot of orthodontists don't give
Mm-hmm.
dental benefits. Vacation time is going to become more important. You can't give this benefit, but working from home is a benefit that a lot of employers are giving in the business world, or working from home part time, or paying part of a
Right.
gas allowance, or things
Mm-hmm.
like that. So there are a lot of different benefits, and you
Right.
need to tune into what matters to your orthodontic team, because that's how you keep them. What matters to your
Okay.
team is very important. So those are four items that are being
Okay.
reported by our respondents. I agree with all of them.
Mm-hmm.
If as the CEO of a consulting
Okay.
firm, these are all great ideas.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. It's good to know that they're on track there. Okay, so let's talk about starts and orthodontic fees. So, the average number of total starts per orthodontist for, let's see, bracket and wires, we reported 204 as the average
Right.
number of starts per orthodontist. Average fee for complete treatment for brackets and wires was 6,287, and then clear aligners we had 83 average annual starts per orthodontist and an average fee of for complete treatment
Right.
$6,467.
Well, the
All right,
first
so what's
thing
the
is
takeaway
what's
here?
happening with aligners. Again, anything I do in ortho, what's the
Mm-hmm.
aligner effect? I call it. I look at that intensely. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it was fairly flat in growth
Mm-hmm.
last year in orthodontic practices. There is going to be an explosion. I'm still
Okay.
predicting 5 years from now it might be as high as 70%. Everything's getting better. The AI
Okay.
is getting better. The biggest company's done 22 million plus cases. If I'm in the ballpark anyway. Um, we know so
Yeah.
much more. We can do it for teens. We can do it for younger kids now. Again, market forces. It started with adults,
Mm-hmm.
then aligners went to teens, then it went to younger, and eventually we'll be doing them in utero. So
Yeah.
probably the next few years. But the point, so it's very interesting.
Yep.
Aligners have not grown as much in ortho. Obviously, they're 95% plus in general dentistry because that's all they can do. But having
Mm.
said that, I think aligners in the next few years, I'll be shocked if these numbers don't explode, because there are more and more parents and
Okay.
patients that are just not going to tolerate anything else. They want aligners, and there'll be practices that are more than happy to do
Yeah.
that for them if your practice doesn't. What's really interesting are the fees. When we first
Mm-hmm.
started with aligners, partly because of that $1,800 lab fee that was out there, everybody put a much higher aligner fee
Mm-hmm.
than a bracket and wire fee. They also didn't have the competition was between orthodontic practices, not all these other service delivery models. Well, now that that's changed, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
surprised that the bracket and wire fee and the aligner fee are pretty close. They're within a couple $100 of each other.
Okay.
And that's the big takeaway.
Yeah.
Watch your fees because you are competing. You don't have to have the highest fees.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have higher volume, which means more systems, better staff training, more scripting, better run practice, more efficiency. You can be very profitable that way, but if you raise your fees too high, you're going to lose a lot of cases. And the tolerance, I still predict we're going to see orthodontic practices with two-tiered fees, where this 62 and 6400 is the high end. Listen, I know there are $10,000 cases out there, and maybe half of that might be the lower end. And I think we're going to see both. Again, market forces. Otherwise, what practices will start doing it when they don't have enough starts. We're not there yet. I hope we never get there, but unfortunately,
Okay.
I think we're going to get there.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's look at the changes in patient visit intervals, so the time between checks. So for, let's see, treatment for bracket and wire, for in-person visits, we've got 7 weeks is the average time between visits. For remote monitoring visits for bracket and wire, we've got 8 weeks. And then clear aligners, we've got 10.1 weeks for in-person visits and 14.7 for remote monitoring visits. So what's the takeaway here?
Well, there's several takeaways. First of
Yeah.
all, it's up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And, bracket and wire, 7 weeks, remote monitoring, 8 weeks. I want to tell everyone before I make any more comments, I'm not speaking clinically. We have never
Yeah.
told an orthodontist how to practice. That's not what we do. But we
Yeah.
can tell them what's happening out there. And it's very interesting with aligners, 10.1 weeks, and remote monitoring, 14.7. So let me tie some thoughts together. Remote monitoring is going to grow very, very quickly. It will become part of every ortho practice in the country, or 90% of them, and within 5 years. It's just there.
Mhm.
Now, anybody listening that doesn't like remote monitoring, and that's a lot of you, I understand that today. But remember, we didn't like aligners when they first came out either. We don't like a lot of things when they first happen.
Yeah.
I'm going to predict that this is going to be huge. The market forces are there. I'm studying it. It's getting better monthly. A lot of practices have no idea how to manage it. They don't know how to put in place a remote monitoring staff member. They don't know how to make it work. But it's going to come, and it's so important. We're starting to incorporate how to manage it into our consulting because we're there. But again, I don't want to be behind for people. And if somebody doesn't need it, fine. But we're putting in our program how to deal with it because we're there. So, but here's what I'm going to say, and this is my opinion now. It's a mistake. These intervals are way too short. I think we're going to find. I have clients, very fine orthodontists, very dedicated, very smart, where it's with aligners, it's 18 weeks between intervals, but with remote monitoring, it's 24 to 28 weeks. We even have somebody at 32 weeks. And as far as I know, they're highly dedicated. We know they're not getting negative feedback because we survey patients in our program. And again, ultimately, they want a beautiful smile. I always explain to orthodontists and TCs, forget everything else, gear everything toward one thing, the beautiful smile. But these intervals are going to grow, and I encourage orthodontists, take a hard look at making them longer. You don't have, I'm not telling you how to practice. If you don't believe in it, that's fine. But otherwise, you're only at this cycle because of basic habits and your comfort zone. But with remote monitoring, everything's going to change. We have a company in Europe also for dental and ortho consulting. And in Europe, they're orthodontists that see the patient for the start, and everything else is remote monitoring. Now, I'm not promoting that. That's not my role. I'm not a clinician. But Europe's way ahead of us in terms of the intervals, and they're comfortable with it. Now, somebody might say, well, they're not as high quality as we are. I'm going to challenge that. We won't know for a little while, but I think they're just more open to this particular methodology of interval setting.
Okay. Well, we also asked the question of what type of appointments doctors are conducting remotely. So the number one type of appointment was the orthodontic check. Then we did new patient consults, retainer checks, emergencies, and then new patient exam. What kind of was your takeaway from that?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. I think orthodontists often view the check as of minor importance. Now, if you've got to change a wire or something, that's fine. But the orthodontic check is just that. It's a check. I mean, that's what orthodontists do most of the afternoon. Check, check, check.
Yeah.
Frankly, a lot of staff members can do it pretty well. So 72% are using some type of monitoring or teledentistry for checks. And ortho's the only part of dentistry really using teledentistry. It's under 3% in general practice. It's not going anywhere. During the pandemic, everybody was predicting where it was going to go and wanted to invest in the companies. And these aren't microchips. Teledentistry is going to have a very minor role in general practice, oral surgery, endo, perio, pedo. But for ortho, it's fantastic. You can save so much time. I love it for checks. I would do as many checks as you can remotely.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the new patient consult,
Yeah. What about that?
well, here's the thing, be careful. The
Okay.
technology is fine, but we don't
Mm-hmm.
know what happens when you don't have a live meeting and consult and relationship. I am very
Okay.
concerned about practices trying to do their new patient uh, exams and consults remotely. I don't think that's going to be good. You need to get
Okay.
that parent and patient in to select you.
Mm-hmm.
Third, retainer checks. I have said for 30 years, again, my opinion, do
Mm-hmm.
two, and by the way, they won't show up for the second one anyway. Uh, so, oh, 50% of retainer checks don't come in on average. I mean,
Yeah.
think about that,
Mm-hmm.
50%. So they're
Right.
just a waste of time. They eat up chair time. You're
Mm-hmm.
never getting back. You're
Mm-hmm.
losing it permanently. So I love it for retainer checks. I think remote monitoring for retainers will be over 70% in 5 years easily.
Okay.
Emergencies, fantastic. Because what you're really
Yeah.
determining is, do they need to come in? That's all. And how quickly
Yeah.
do
Is
they
it an
need?
emergency?
Right.
Yeah.
Stop blowing
Exactly.
up your schedule and do a remote exam. And finally,
Mm-hmm.
the new patient exam. Again, be careful. Right now, I would advise clients get new patients into your office so you can control
Okay.
the incredible new patient experience, and they
Mm-hmm.
start with you. So,
Okay.
but ortho checks, that's only going to rise and rise and rise. That's the easy one,
Okay.
and that's almost double the next closest remote monitoring.
Okay. So another uh, issue that came out of the survey findings was we found that almost one quarter, 22% of orthodontic practices do not have a full-time treatment coordinator. What's the takeaway from that?
It's the first time we've asked that, and I was
Yeah.
shocked. I was
Mm-hmm.
absolutely shocked the way we
Yeah.
asked it. If you don't have a TC, get one. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Number one,
Yeah.
they will save the orthodontist so much time. You know, even though ortho goes chair to chair to chair, you still have to
Mm-hmm.
look at it from a doctor production standpoint. Every time a doctor's at a
Mm-hmm.
chair, that's production. Every time a doctor's at a consult, that's not production. So oh, excuse me, got to sneeze there.
Okay.
So we want orthodontists in the main clinical area with parents, patients, and adult patients as much as possible. The
Mm-hmm.
throughput, the volume we can put through is much bigger in most ortho practices. Remember, let's cycle back to the beginning. They're mostly running $500,000 a year production below potential. So
Mm-hmm.
you want to get a TC. Number two, the TC is going to spend more time. These are our consults. You build
Mm-hmm.
relationships. You learn about the parent, the patient. You learn why they're there. You build commonality. And what we teach, and we teach it minute by minute, step by step, build a
Mm-hmm.
relationship. It's not just a sales job. It is building a relationship to build trust to get a start. That's what you really want. You want mom going home, and 80% of the time it's mom saying to her husband, this is where we need to go. This is the right
Mm-hmm.
place. We're not going to another place for
Right.
$400 less because the husband wasn't there. It's typically the
Mm-hmm.
husband when mom comes home and says, "Oh, we went to the orthodontist today," that says, "Get another opinion." So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because even in our equal world, husbands do a lot more of the daily checking account. And
Yeah.
they're watching some of the money,
Right.
and men
Okay.
are often more likely to bid it out, especially if they
Mm.
didn't hear the
Okay.
presentation. So you
Okay.
need a TC that's trained exactly what to do, and the TCs
Mm-hmm.
today are not the TCs of even 5 years ago. They need to
Hmm.
understand there's competition out there. You need to be
Okay.
building your scripting to incorporate why come here before anybody asks you or doesn't bother to ask you. So the
Mm-hmm.
TC today has to build value, not just explain orthodontics. You can't take a former assistant and stick them in that role with no training and expect them to do well. This is a professional sales position to build relationships, engender trust, and create starts. And then measure
Okay.
them and measure them and measure them.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what's your overall message to our listeners and our readers?
Well, I started by saying the word from this survey is stability. And that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Stable is good. But
Mm-hmm.
stable doesn't stay stable. And when I look at the trends, between an economy where some basic goods and staples are costing more money, and that's what people look at, in a competitive landscape where we have DSOs and general dentists doing more with aligners. We have ortho only DSOs, but we've got the big boys and girls, as I call them, starting to bring in more ortho because it's lucrative.
Right.
We've got staffing challenges, and which, even if we put aside the frustration and headaches, we've got higher overhead that needs to be offset by higher production. So my message is, if there was ever a time to organize your practice, streamline it with systems, get everything in place as if you were declining, even if you're not, this is that time. Because right now we're stable.
Okay.
So you've got time to get it right. But if we happen to go into some decline, as I think a lot of practices will in the next years, I'm not gloom and doom, not tomorrow. But the best time to build is before you have a problem, and it's also easier and faster. But I'll end where I started. Any practice can do well if it applies the right methodologies and systems and practice management. But you can't just rely on that economic law of supply and demand anymore. It's not as much in our favor as it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Levin, thank you so much for taking the time to break this all down for our readers and our listeners.
Thank you, Allison. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Great. Well, and to those of you who want to learn more about the survey, it will be in our upcoming April-May issue, which will, if you don't get it in the mail, then you can also find it at the AAO at our booth. And you can also find the article online. And we'll have a link to the full article with this podcast if you go visit our website. So thank you for joining us, and thank you again, Dr. Levin. As always, thank you for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the Orthodontic Products Podcast to keep up with the latest episodes, and be sure to check out orthodonticproductsonline.com to keep up with the latest industry news. Until next time, take care.